Oh, it seems you want a scary story. Well, lucky for you, I'll be reading free today. Of the book I've created. It's called Snakebite. There's 3 stories in the book. First one being Snakebite, and then others that we'll read later in this video. Just a fair warning, if you can't handle scary stuff, this isn't the video for you. But it won't be that bad. There's no gore. You should be good. So let's jump right into story 1. Snakebite. Once there was a girl named Allison. She lived by a deep, dark swamp. In this swamp, there were thousands of snakes. All the locals believed it was haunted. All but Allison. She always wanted to be a part of the swamp. For years, she wanted to go there herself. And one day, she got that wish. Of night, she snuck out. She wandered out into the swamp, the night swallowing her slowly like the snakes within it. Never had she felt so free, but it didn't last long. Suddenly, a snake leaped from the mud and bit into Allison's arm. Ow! She screamed, clutching her arm. Then the snake slithered away back into the water. Somehow the bite wasn't bleeding, but it did look a bit sore. She didn't want to risk getting bitten again, so she ran back to her room, hoping the snake wasn't venomous. But in reality, it was worse than a venomous snake. The next day, she felt a bit off. Knew something was wrong, but she just couldn't put her finger on it, until she checked her bite. It seemed to have healed, but in its place was a rash. It was all hard and scaly, and seemed to be spreading, but she didn't think much of it. For the rest of the day, nothing happened. She hid her rash, making sure nobody knew about the night before. She spent the whole day without anything happening, but it was time for the nightmare to begin. That night, she had a terrible nightmare. She was back in the swamp, panting like she had been running for quite some time. She looked down and saw her legs fusing together to make a tail, as scales spread across her body. She fell to the ground as her translation continued. She looked at the sky and saw that it had turned a bloody red. Fear spread across her body like the scales covering her. Her red-hot pain searing through her as she transformed. Then, from the water leaped a snake that had bit her, its eyes glowing red. It readied itself to strike, but just as it was about to bite her, she woke up. Sweat. She shot out of bed, feeling sick and terrified. She ran to the bathroom and gazed into the mirror, immediately looking away after. Her face was slowly being covered in scales, causing a wild flare of pain as they spread. She looked down. The scales crept up her arm. She screamed as she hit the ground, her legs turning to a tail. She dragged herself towards the door, the pain stabbing into her body. She tried to tell herself it was just a dream, but she knew it wasn't. Then her arms disappeared, leaving her unable to go any further. She screamed and hissed as her mouth grew wider and wider, and her teeth turned to fangs. Her pupils turned to slits as her vision reddened, and finally her transformation was complete. 2 weeks later. 2 weeks had passed. Allison had been missing for a while. But when her friends came looking for her, all they found was the snake with the head of a human. Oh, I guess you're not scared yet. Wow, this one sure is to scare you. Good luck. The Girl Who Cried Croc. There was a girl named Millie. Millie was a strange girl. Every night at exactly midnight, she would disappear from her bed and return in the morning in tattered clothes, screaming about a giant crocodile that stood on 2 legs. Her parents did not know what was wrong with her. "Nothing wants to get you," her mom would say. "There's no crocodiles around here," her dad would exclaim, but no matter how hard they tried, nothing changed. On their anniversary, they wanted to go on a date, but they couldn't leave Millie alone. She was only 4 after all. So they called a babysitter to watch her, and made sure to tell her about Millie's odd problem. The sitter agreed to watch Millie, and they told her they'd be back by 12:30, and they left for their date. Everything went well at first. They played games, watched movies, and Millie went to bed without a fuss. But that didn't last long. The sitter had turned on her favorite scary movie and was starting to get comfortable when Millie came down the steps. "What do you want?" asked the babysitter. "I'm hungry," said Millie. "What do you want to eat?" said the babysitter. Then Millie's lips peeled back into an eerie grin and she said, "You." Then she instantly began to transform. Her skin became thick and scaly as she grew 8 feet. She growled as her face bulged out into a snout and her teeth became razor sharp. Her hands grew long claws as a tail sprung from her back. She glared at the babysitter as her eyes began to glow red. Then she ran at the babysitter fast as the wind and bit into her leg. No longer able to run, she crawled towards the door screaming for help. But it was no use. She couldn't go anymore. The beast swallowed her whole. One day later, when her parents returned, they asked what had happened to the babysitter. But she said, "The crocodile got her." Still not scared yet? Well, you're sure to be after this one. It's a short one, but this should still scare you. Under the rug. Once there was an old man who lives in an old house by an old road. He was tall and pale with no hair on top of his head. He lived alone, but he wasn't lonely. Everything was normal until one night. It was a night like any other, until it turned midnight. He was awoken by a scratching sound coming from downstairs. He slowly crept down the steps into the living room as darkness fell over the house. It was as if a piece of the night wandered into the room. But even in this darkness, he could make out something moving under the rug. Shaking, he walked towards the rug, quiet as a mouse. He grabbed the chair and smashed the rug, and the creature that had been under it before disappeared. All was normal for a while. 2 weeks passed, and it happened again. He grabbed the chair just as before and smashed it into the rug, and it vanished once more. But after a week, it returned. He crushed it again, but it came back 2 days later. He would smash it away, but it would always come back. He couldn't take it anymore. Finally, after all this time, he lifted the rug from the ground, and what he found was nightmarish. Sleeping there was a small creature, about the size of a raccoon. It had messy gray fur, 5 beady eyes, and a mouth so large it could swallow the man's head whole. He slowly crept closer to the creature, but it noticed him. It immediately woke up and began to let out a piercing cry, its mouth gaping open, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. In fear, he grabbed the chair once more and crushed the monster. He hit it again and again and again, turning it to dust. The nightmare was finally over. You're still not scared? Well, I guess nothing can scare you. None of these monsters have affected you yet. But guess what? I am a monster.